When the Phone Rings, My Bed Shakes is written by Philip Zazov. It's a non-fictional autobiography that bounces between his interactions with his patients and the journey he went on to become the successful doctor he is today. If you are looking for this book, it's on the 5th floor of Milner, and if you search online for it, there's a link to a map of the 5th floor of the library, and it'll lead you right to it, or you can always ask a helpful librarian. The main character of the book is obviously the doctor himself, Philip Zazov. His lovely wife is named Barbara, and together they have 2 children named Rebecca and Katie. Rebecca, Katie, and Barbara are all hearing, by the way. The book jumps around quite a bit because it is not chronologically written, but rather bounces back and forth between his struggle to become a doctor and his experiences as a doctor. As far as anyone knows, Philip was born deaf. When he was born, his ears were so large that he can't help but see the irony that he hasn't heard a day in his life. His family first realized his hearing loss when he was about 4 years old. His father was facing away from him while Philip was talking to him. His father responded, but because he was not facing Philip, Philip was unable to read his lips and understand what he was saying. Philip got upset and told his father to look at him when he spoke. His father responded that he didn't have to look at Philip to understand what he was saying. Philip responded by asking his father how else he would hear him. This led to much testing, which confirmed that he could only hear the lowest end of the normal hearing range for human beings, and even in those frequencies he had about a 50 decibel loss. Philip depended on lip reading and a lot of speech training to be able to communicate without sign language. Continuing on the Main Street track he had been on his entire life, Philip attended Northwestern University as a pre-med major, and he played football. Philip reflects that socially his hearing loss was never a significant problem in college. During his 4th year at Northwestern, Philip began applying to medical schools across the country. Philip got many interviews from the schools. However, despite his excellent grades and his qualifications, no medical school accepted him. He learned that many of his hearing peers who had lower grades and fewer qualifications than he had been accepted into schools that had declined him. He became upset. He had proven himself numerous times and was tired of having to do it repeatedly. He goes on to admit that he had not yet come to the grips with the fact that he would always have to do so. Despite the rejection, he decided to try again the following year. He attended grad school at Northwestern studying biology and wasted no time applying to medical schools across the country, not wanting to miss out on anyone that would give him a fair chance. As he went through interviews, he kept receiving many of the same questions that focused solely on his hearing loss. Rutgers was different. The interview there focused on his abilities as a student and his accomplishments rather than his hearing loss. 6 weeks later, he got the acceptance letter. All the bitterness he had towards the medical field disappeared and were replaced with pure joy in knowing he would finally get a chance to do what he loved for a living. Although he loved Rutgers University, there was not enough space in the program for everyone in it to stay, so he decided to apply to Washington University. He was accepted there, and this is where he met his wife and love of his life, Barbara. It was also here that they both decided that they wanted to be family doctors. Philip loved the idea of being close with his patients and watching them grow as individuals as well as families. Barbara and Philip never planned on living in Utah, but that is where they ended up putting down their roots. They settled down in a town called Plymouth, and they found a perfect spot for Philip to open up his first private practice as a family doctor. It seemed as though all his hard work had finally paid off. Philip did learn sign language, but he continues to communicate by reading lips and speaking. He struggles with the pronunciation of words that are not spoken as they are spelled. For example, the CH in the Chicago makes the sh sound instead of the ch sound. But as long as he can see a person's lips and read their body language, he can communicate with them. He mostly learned ASL so he could communicate with deaf patients and allow them the same doctor-patient confidentiality that gets taken away when deaf patients are forced to use an interpreter or a translator.